it's kind of blowing my mind how many authors I'm able to book. I don't know what's going on. I think I know what's going on, but I'm not entirely sure. And here's what I'm thinking about all of it. I'm thinking everyone's just fucking sitting at home. And like most things in life, you're never going to get the things you want unless you go after them, right? So none of these authors are hitting me up, right? I'm emailing every single person that comes on this podcast. And just like the dogged determination that I have to kind of just try to get it up and off the ground is really what's moving me forward, because I can't really tell if anyone's listening to it. I get some YouTube clips, right? You can see the views. And people on SoundCloud, I can see they're listening to it, but I have no idea who's listening to it on Apple and Spotify. But if I end up doing, 50 of these episodes, 100 of these episodes, even if I stop now, it's such a comprehensive and fucking heady group of thinkers and creatives I've already had the pleasure of talking to. And I was just walking the dogs right now. I'm in the van, right, dropping them off, and it was just crazy. I was thinking about it. I got 3 responses today from people I didn't think they were going to respond, and they did, and they're all going to come on the podcast. And I don't get nervous about what I'm going to talk to about them. I get 20 times more nervous about doing these little rambles. But but I was told people like them, so I'll do them. But yeah, and talking to all of them, and just when I'm listening back and editing these things, I have to find these clips. I'm the producer of the show too, obviously. So I'm finding all these clips. I'm finding the juicy things to to edit down and make little YouTube videos of. And it's been dope. It's been a lot of fun. Because a lot of, when you're talking to someone for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, sometimes I kind of I don't zone out, but it's not easy. Especially on the phone. The phone is the toughest. The Zoom podcasts are dope because I can see them at least, But yeah, the phone podcast, that's doing radio. Yeah, when they would call in and Howard Stern would pick up the phone and have no idea who was on the other side. Yeah, so I got a whole bunch of cool shit coming on. I need to figure out a way to get more people aware of this. And again, the cool thing with podcasts is they're not going anywhere. So once someone finds it, they'll have that whole backlog. But yeah, I just want to just help share it. Because I think this is super fucking dope. I don't really know any other podcasts that are kind of doing what I'm doing, right now. At least when it comes to the book world. But yeah. So again, all right, cool. Check this next episode out. And share, please, on Twitter and Instagram. Writing Friction. And subscribe to the YouTube page. Check out those clips. And yeah, all right, I'll see you all next time. Thanks. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone say hello to Julia Phillips. What's going on, Julia?
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm pretty good. Yeah. I'm loving the idea of the podcast audience, everyone saying hello in their own separate places.
It's kind of pretty cool. People are digging it. It's amazing the reaction I'm getting, because I've been having so many different kinds of authors on who write about all different kinds of things. And it's interesting, the people who give me feedback, it's all been quite a trip.
I love that.
Yeah, but right when you called in, I knew I was going to talk it off the bat. So everyone knows you were talking to 2 people from New Jersey, not just one this time. One person from New Jersey is normally enough. And you're from Montclair, right?
I am. Yeah, I spent my whole childhood, ages 4 to 18.
Did you write your first pages in Montclair?
I think I must have. I think I learned to write. I learned to write letters in Montclair for sure. I think, and wrote some childhood novels that a lot of epic novels about girls lost in the woods and being raised by wolves. I think that was my second grade novel. I'm very, very proud of it.
In the woods of New Jersey. That's kind of a, yeah.
The Garden State, man.
So I mean, you're talking about second grade. Were you writing that early on?
I think I definitely wanted to be a writer that early on. I really loved books, and so it seemed like an exciting thing to want to be. But it all seemed very, I also wanted to be like an astronaut veterinarian.
Mm-hmm.
Being an author seemed as impossible as anything else, or as possible as anything else.
And so when you're writing those first couple of things, I mean, obviously if you're a kid, you're writing for fun, but like at what point do you actually think to yourself, all right, I'm going to go to school for this. I'm going to live in Russia. I'm going to write a novel. I mean, at what point do those kind of ideas start formulating in your head?
I had a real advantage. I had lots of advantages, but one was that I grew up in a house. My mother's an actor. So I grew up in a house where, there was a working artist who kind of showed every day, like, oh, I'm going to appointments now. I'm going to an audition now. Like here I am in a commercial here, and was a very consistently working artist. And because of that, I think it seemed possible to me pretty early on to be a working artist too. It was, she was a really great role model in that sense. And so certainly by high school, I was pretty determined to be a writer, and I had big ideas and plans of how that would come to pass. It turned out just a little bit differently than I had, planned at 14, but certainly I had these ideas of like, well, you get an MFA and you start publishing short stories and you et cetera, and that sort of early idea of what a writer's career looked like, I think I still cling to it in some ways, or imagine that that's how it should go.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, now that you've pursued that writer's career, does it still seem that way? Is that still the route? I mean, you're talking to a guy who toured in bands for almost 20 years, and then I decided to start writing at 30. So if anything, I went the opposite route.
Totally.
But looking back on it now, I mean, for people listening to this, I mean, is that just the way it goes? You go to the school, you get the MFA, you do this, you do that, and then bada bing, bada boom, it happens? Or now that you're on the other side of it, do you see some flexibility in that route, having met other authors?
I definitely see flexibility in that route, and yet I'm surprised by so I don't have an MFA. That didn't end up being my path.
There it is.
And yet still, every year I'm like, should I apply for an MFA? Is that going to make me a real writer?
Yeah.
Including this past fall after my book was out, I was like, I think I need to apply for an MFA in order to be a real. Yeah, totally.
That's crazy.
In some ways it's crazy, but in other ways, it opens up, it has some costs and some benefits, it seems to me from the outside. It opens up some career possibilities that, or it doesn't. I'm really not sure. It's still a bit of a foreign land to me, the whole kind of academic writing world. And I think definitely the expectation I had was a sort of like bada bing, bada boo. It's very Jersey. But, kind of like you do the right thing and then you do the next right thing and then the next right thing falls into place. Yeah. And if you just sort of line up all the dominoes, then they'll all fall down into this perfect career. And I've been really, I'm very, very early in my career, and yet it's been shocking to me at this point to look around and realize how much has happened just out of sheer luck and happenstance, and that had like very little to do with me, diligently writing my MFA application and then getting into this great program and then blah, 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 kind of. Well,
you say luck.
Those cards.
Yeah, you say luck, and luck has always been kind of an interesting word to me because, being lucky is being at the right place at the right time, but also being prepared, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure you spent hours and hundreds of hours alone writing that, when these things were about to happen, you were mentally prepared and also, artistically prepared.
I was talking with a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and we were talking about waiting for lightning to strike, but like being in an all metal suit and kind of parading around in a field waiting for it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the idea of people thinking it's going to happen, luck happening to them without putting in any of the work. I mean, to me, that's not lucky. That's pretty crazy. So you started writing out short stories in the beginning, right? Before you kind of took on the idea of a full novel?
Let me think. It was all sort of conflated, I think. I always wanted to be a novelist, and I thought that short stories was the way to get there. And so when I was, thinking about when I was in college, for example, I was trying to write short stories and send those out. And also I was in writing workshops in college and trying to prepare short stories for those. And I was also working on a novel at that time and for a while after college that I was very determined would be my first published book, and which talk about luck, very luckily was not.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. You say that. I mean, so does that first novel still exist somewhere?
It exists on my computer.
Yeah. Okay. It seems to be a running theme.
I wish. Yeah. I remember I queried agents really, really aggressively with that one, and I remember an agent calling me on the phone, and I was, obviously so excited. I thought, this is it. This is when it happens. And she was just being very encouraging and nice and said, I'm not going to do this, but I want you to know that I've had clients who wrote 8 books before, 8 manuscripts before their first book was published. And I was like, this is the worst book.
Literally, I know, yeah.
Like, why are you telling me this? But now I feel a little bit more even keeled about it. But at the time I thought, I hate you.
Very true. I mean, I my first book got published 3 weeks before the world shut down. And when I was querying that book, I got rejected by over 70 different literary agents. And, and the best thing that they can tell you is, I love it, but this is not the right book for me.
Totally.
And so like you said, when you got that phone call, you're like, oh my God, it's happening. I've talked about this on previous episodes of the same thing. When I got that first email, I'm like, oh my God, this is it. And now I'm going to get 17 more emails all bidding over my book. Well,
absolutely.
That did not happen. The first novel, I've talked to authors who have taken their first novel and, thrown it in a volcano. It's interesting. But when you're working on those short stories and you're working on that novel, are you the kind of author who's able to kind of jump in between different projects easily? Or are you the kind of author who's just one thing at a time until it's done and then the next thing?
That's a great question. I don't know if I'm able to jump in between different projects easily, but certainly for me, working on a novel-length project takes a really long time, or really, many, many years. And because of that, while I'm doing that, I'm writing shorter things too, both fiction and nonfiction when the occasion arises, because otherwise it is quite stultifying. It's really difficult for me to just work on this one thing in privacy that no one's seeing, that is sort of an idea that I'm holding and treasuring for years and years without any other without anything else going on.
So it's not that you're necessarily looking for feedback, right, for this project that you're working on for reassurance, but you get reassurance maybe from working on other things and kind of just taking a deep breath and stepping away from it.
Yes, yeah. I feel like for me, the phases where I'm seeking feedback in the novel are very exciting and take a while to get to, and then a while to incorporate that feedback afterwards. So in the life, it might be a couple of years out of the decade that I'm workshopping pieces of it. And because of that, exactly right, it's nice to have feedback or sort of participate in the writing world with some shorter pieces.
Have you ever gotten stuck up on people's feedback? Maybe it's things you didn't want to hear? Or editors that maybe, again, writing is such a sensitive thing.
Yeah.
Coming from the music world, it was very easy for me to be like, if I play a guitar riff, my bandmate's like, that riff sucks. Because music is an instantaneous feedback. But with, when I give some of my stuff for people to check back into, to read, over for me. There's a sense of vulnerability there.
Absolutely,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, these are your thoughts on the page, even if it is fiction. It's still part of you. So when you're doing that, do you have certain people that you give your stuff out to that you just trust their feedback and?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have. I'm in a couple of writing groups that are absolutely foundational. Getting the feedback of the people in those groups, it just means everything to me.
Oh, yeah.
I trust them completely, and it's so. I think for me, the sort of sharing the experience of workshopping or the experience of sharing your work with other people around you, other people that you trust, readers that know what you're trying to do and believe in what you're trying to do, and then getting their feedback, that is so important to the development of the work. I don't know how I would do it on my own. That being said, I could probably, I'm sure, I'm trying to think of, what did you say before, feedback that was sort of paralyzing or that got me really stuck.
Or maybe that wasn't what you wanted to hear.
I've definitely gotten lots and lots of feedback that wasn't what I wanted to hear. And lots of folks responding to work in development and even work when it's over in all sorts of different ways. I think I could probably stand to absorb more feedback. I really foster a kind of artistic delusion in myself where I'm like, this is the best. I am the best. This is amazing. They just don't get it.
Well, you need that, though.
Yeah, I think you do need it. I think you need both. You need to be able to hear people and to sort of be able to shut them out and tell yourself that you're just, you're doing your thing and no one gets it yet, but soon they will.
Yeah.
To me, that's been a really, really, really important thing. It has also, I feel that it is an attitude that's taken me down the path I'm on to good degrees and bad degrees. I for example, that first manuscript, I got a lot of feedback on that. That was like, okay, move on to the next project. You've done everything you can with this one, and now it's time to move on. And I was like, they just don't get it.
Really interesting. Well, I don't mean to cut you off. I recently had Christine Scutt on, and she's been writing.
She's the best person in the world.
She was so nice.
A genius.
And she's been writing forever. And she said, the name of the book escapes me, but I think it was her first kind of book that broke her. And she said,
Night Work, maybe?
It could have been. I don't want to speak out of term.
Yeah, totally.
But she had said that when she got rejected by everyone, she went back, she was looking at this book, and she kept telling herself, she's like, no, this is good. I know what I have. I'm going to keep going with it, and eventually found a little publisher, and again, bada bing, bada boom. But hearing her talk about that, I mean, it's so again, going back to the idea of writing being such a emotional thing, personal thing, it's so easy for writers to get caught up in their own personal doubt, but then get caught up in the doubt of outside forces. And to barrel down and really kind of just do the work. And like you're saying, no one really gets it right now, but I know what's up. I'm going to do it. And just trusting yourself.
Totally. 100%.
It's like if you're a baseball player, right, you practice all day. The idea is to set and forget. So that way when the ball's coming in the air, you don't have to think about the thousands of balls you've caught before. You have to trust in your ability. So do you ever deal with that kind of doubt when you're working on a new project? Yeah. I mean, like, how do you go about battling that?
One thing, I think I read Jamie Attenberg saying this like a few years ago, and it really stuck with me, which is that the roller coaster of emotion, where one minute you think this is the best thing that's ever been done, I can't believe how exquisite this is, and the next minute you're like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened, I should hide away from humanity for the rest of my life. That is, everyone goes on that. Christine Scott, I remember talking to her a couple years ago, and I was like, does it get easier by the time you're doing your 6th book or your 7th book? And she was like, no, it just gets more and more horrible.
That's
every
what
time.
She said.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
She's so funny and brilliant. And so I think about how the fact that I feel that way doesn't mean that the process is going wrong. It actually means the process is working. I mean, it means that I'm
it's
in
a process.
Where I feel, it's a process, and it makes us feel vulnerable and unsure and full of doubt, and that's what it's supposed to be. I mean, that's what it's all about. So when I feel that way, I try to remind myself, like, I don't need to. This isn't a sign that something is terribly amiss. It isn't, an indication that I need to stop working on this. It's just, I just need to write it out. And so I write it out by indulging it. I'm like, oh, this is terrible, and I don't know what I'm doing, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend to others.
Well, I mean, it's such a human thing, and I'm going to make a hard left turn here, but we're going to kind of keep it in the same way. You're a girl from Jersey who ends up in Russia, right?
Yeah.
So, not everyone can hop on a plane to Siberia. There's a lot of doubt that goes along with that kind of thing. Can you kind of talk about how a girl from Montclair ends up in the Siberian Peninsula?
Oh, so I was really interested in studying Russian. So I had this ambition to be a writer.
Anyone Russian in your family?
No one Russian in my family.
Maybe you're Dostoevsky's great granddaughter or something.
No. Yes, that's it. That's all. It's all in the blood. No, I not at all. When I was a middle schooler, I went to summer camp also in North Jersey, and I had a Russian American camp counselor, and I had an insane crush on him. I thought he was the cutest person in the world. And he spoke some Russian, and I was like, wow, Russian is fascinating. Russian, I really want to learn Russian. And after that, lost touch with that person instantly, but got very compelled. I started listening to more Russian being spoken and reading Russian literature and learning about Russian history, and it kind of took on a life of its own, this interest. I feel when there's a certain age for me around 12 years old, 13 years old, where the influences I encountered then ended up shaping my whole life. Like, it's still the music I listen to. It just became really kind of fundamental, and Russian studies became that for me. So I studied Russian in college, and studied abroad in Moscow, and really wanted to go back, and really wanted to hop on a plane to Siberia. And it's quite challenging logistically and financially for a million different reasons. So
how do you even get to Siberia?
Like on a plane, or
I'm assuming it's by a plane. Yeah, I mean, are there flights from Moscow or St. Petersburg that far out east?
Oh yeah, definitely. So that's what I ended up doing. It's like an 11-hour from New York. It's an 11-hour flight to Moscow, and then a 9-hour flight to Kamchatka, which is where my book is set, and where I ended up being for about a year the first trip, and then a season the second trip.
That is gnarly.
It was gnarly. It was awesome. And I ended up, I want to say, for writing, for anyone out there who is interested in writing, and not necessarily Siberia or Russia, but traveling through writing, I went there on a Fulbright grant. And whenever I talk to folks about it, I'm like, I really recommend it to you. And everyone's like, oh, ha ha ha, yeah, you recommend this? Sure, I recommend getting a Rhodes Scholarship or something. It's not to besmirch the good name of Fulbright. It's not a Rhodes Scholarship. And the year I applied, so I applied twice. I was waitlisted both times. And each year, my chances of getting the grant were about 1 in 4. Okay. And thinking about the writing world, and when we send our work to a literary magazine, our chances of getting published are 1 in 10,000. And I was doing that all the time. And yeah, and so the idea of applying to the Fulbright application was more intensive. It's just another thing, and actually your chances are a lot better. It's really a lot more achievable.
That's funny
to do, and it gave me, I think, $30,000 and support to live in Kamchatka for a year. It was extraordinary.
What do you eat for breakfast there?
Oh God. It just made me hungry.
So making shots of vodka and quail eggs or something.
No. I did not have shots of vodka. Maybe once or twice I had shots of vodka for breakfast. But they have really good, and I miss it all the time, really good dairy products
most def.
Yogurt and cottage cheese and farmer's cheese. So I would have farmer's cheese and preserves, like berry preserves that people would give me in jars, and it was just the best. Every single day of my life, I'm like, why aren't I eating that right now?
Right now, yeah. Well, living in New York City, I guess is a little different than Siberia.
That's all I want. That's all I want.
A bacon and egg sounds pretty good too. But wait, so you're growing up, you're obsessed with Russia. You meet this Russian camp counselor, whatever. Okay, now, did you know you wanted to write about Russia?
I knew I wanted to write about Russia by the time I was doing the Fulbright application for that. So that was in 2009 when I first did the application.
But the idea for the novel was not in your head yet.
Let me see. In my initial application, I say I'm applying for a grant in creative writing to move to Kamchatka to write a set of interlinked short stories set in Kamchatka. And I said at the time that it would be about ecotourism. It would be centered around people who work in tourism, which I knew it was never going to be that, but it's very concrete. And I knew some people there who worked in ecotourism that were willing to support the application. And I knew if I was lucky enough to get it, I would not be sort of tested on how faithful I was to the application later. Mm-hmm. So
it was kind of like me in Birthright Israel. Yeah, continue.
Yeah. You're like, I'll take this trip. So by that time, certainly by the time I was doing the application, I knew I wanted to write about Russia. I knew I wanted to write a novel about Russia, and more specifically, a novel about Kamchatka. And I think I really developed that determination to write fiction set in Russia because through college I was studying creative writing and Russian, and I wanted to find a way to combine the two.
Makes sense.
Because it seemed like I was spending a lot of time doing each, and if I did both together, then it would help me with both.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Russian is considered the hardest language to learn, right?
You know what? I don't think it's super simple, but I think it's not super hard either. That is, it has some similarities to other languages. It has a different alphabet. It has a Cyrillic alphabet, so it uses a different alphabet than English. But it's not. To me, I always thought a tonal language would be a lot harder to learn, like languages where you have to sort of have the ear for them. Mm-hmm. And Russian does have a really appealing grammatical structure. Okay. That is, like, words change their endings depending on where they are in a sentence. Okay. Depending on, whether they're the object or the direct object, or I think object and direct object, subject and direct object. Yeah. I don't know any grammar. The point is,
and how much yogurt they ate too. Yeah. Exactly.
It has an inherent logic, which is not just its own, which other languages too, and that was really appealing to me and made it make a lot of sense. That being said, my Russian skills, the best they ever, I studied Russian I lived in Russia for about 2 years, and I studied Russian for probably 7 or 8 years, and I never achieved total fluency, but that is, I think, a reflection of my lack of language skills rather than the difficulty of the language.
Okay, fair enough. Wait, so you show up there, and I mean, not to get too specific, but I mean, again, you have this idea, you want to write these collected short stories. When did you kind of realize, well, no, this is going to be maybe better off as a novel? Or did someone else tell you that?
That is, okay, so I got there. When I got there, I knew I wasn't going to write about ecotourism. I still wanted to write sort of a collection, or I wanted to write something that had many different characters and that covered a lot of ground, because I wanted to meet as many people and see as many places there as possible. This was still sort of feeding out of my Russian studies interest. Yeah. And I started working on I was, taking a lot of notes and meeting a lot of people and having a lot of experiences. And when I got back to the U.S. after that year, I started to assemble it and write some fiction and think of it, I kind of decided on the structure as the structure that exists now in the published book, in Disappearing Earth, which is all these different basically it starts with the disappearance of these 2 young girls, and then it follows a year through this community, and every chapter is from a different woman in the community's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all in the kind of like backbone or under the large umbrella of the girl's disappearance.
Yeah.
So we see all these different people, but they are all kind of different facets of or reflect different entrances into this case. And I started working on that as soon as, pretty much as soon as I got back from Russia. And I thought of that as a collection of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote that. I think I had the second draft. It still had the same exact structure it has now. All the chapters were in places, I drafted all the different chapters. When I read through the full draft of the manuscript, I realized that the girl's disappearance was much more interesting to me. I wanted to give it more room than it had on the page already.
Mm-hmm.
And that the more I enhanced that, the more the kind of like thematic connections and ideas and character traits that I was trying to convey came through. So the stronger the actual backbone of the plot was, the stronger the entire work was.
Yeah.
So I started trying to kind of ramp that up. At that point, I thought of it as, I was calling it in my head, a novel and stories.
Okay.
And to be honest, I still think of it as a novel and stories. I think of it as one story, one larger story that's composed of many different stories.
Yeah.
So talk about Christine Scott. In 2016, I went to the Sewanee Writers Conference and Christine Scott was my workshop leader and completely blew my mind and changed my life. And at that conference, there was an editor talking about on a panel, and he was very confident. He was very impressive and very intimidating. And someone asked about novels and stories, and he was like, "That doesn't exist. There is no such thing. Never heard of it. That's not real." He was like, either it's a novel or it's a short story collection. And I went up to him afterwards, and I was like so upset because at that point I'd been working on this, novel and stories as I thought of it for 7 years in one form or another, and I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So I went up to him and I was like, well, what about like A Visit from the Goon Squad? And I would have said
that was the book I was about to say.
Yeah. Like, what about, it wasn't published yet. Like, what about There? Like, what about all these different books?
The one that just won the Pulitzer Prize, The Overstory by Richard Powers. Yes, that's literally what we're talking about.
And he was like, nope. He was like, it's
Amazing.
a novel or it's a collection of short stories and that's it. And I thought, well, okay, if it's a novel or a collection of short stories and that's it, I'm going to call it a novel. It is a novel. And that was, 6-9 months before I sold the book. So at that point, the conception of it as a novel, nothing really changed, by any means in the structure. It was only what I called it in query letters or now on the cover of the book. It says a novel.
Well, there it is. I mean, it's almost a form of rejection helping you, right? This guy telling you something can't be done or it can't be this or it can't be that. And you're like, all right, well, what the fuck? All right, then. I mean, again, you're much more involved in the book world than I am. I'm still very new to it, but man, I'm learning more and more. It's a very, I don't want to use the word like antiquated business, but it's an interesting business of how they do things. I mean, like the music publishing world has had to adapt dramatically. And they're still having issues with it, but they're open to change. It's like in the book world, man, it's like it's still 1974. This is how but that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just how it is.
It's kind of like I think it is a good thing and a bad thing, and I'm learning about it. So at every step, I learn so much about it, and there's so much ahead to learn, and so much that surprises me. And I remember when I was working on when the book had been acquired, and the New York publishing scene is very, like in my very limited experience, it always blows my mind like how classy and fancy it seems to me, because that is not. I just didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
And I remember at a certain point, I would sometimes have edits messengered to me, which like the actual noted up manuscript,
like a bike messenger.
Yeah, I guess a bike messenger.
Yeah.
The same day. But my editor would send them, and then the same day they would arrive to me.
Yeah.
And this, like, never in my life had I had, or have I since had anything messengered to me. That is so fancy. And I remember at one point saying, like, trying to make a joke to my editor and her assistant, or a few editors, where I was like, well, no, no wonder like publishing's having a tough time. You're like spending all this money on messengers, on same day or courier services like that, and everyone was just silent.
Oh boy!
I was like, I'm sorry, I meant it as a compliment. Man. I'm very impressed by it. Like, I'm so sorry, but it was like there are conventions of how things are done that to me are quite mind blowing and surprising.
That's certainly hilarious. I mean, I would have made that same joke too, and I mean, it's just like it's when things are so obvious to you, it's funny. Even like when you go on their websites, like it looks like they're made in 2001 and they haven't been updated since. And it's like, you know, again, I'm a little more sensitive to it because I was just so involved in trying to get this book out. But it's crazy. So I know you got a hard cutoff time. I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours. Maybe,
oh my God, you're totally right.
Yeah, maybe let's try to definitely get you back on. Real quick, let everyone know, are you on Instagram, Twitter, or are you part of that universe?
I'm part of that universe, barely. Which is to say, I'm a very active lurker, and I don't post very much. So in many ways, I'm the ideal person to follow, because I will like everything that you post and watch all of your stories.
And not comment.
And sometimes comment, but I definitely not post any of my own content. So I'm Julia Phillips Writes on Instagram, and JKB Phillips on Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah, and again, definitely try to get you back on. Everyone,
I love it.
Yeah, you know, buy Julia's book, Disappearing Earth, from your local bookstore, please. What's your go-to bookstore in New York?
My go-to bookstore is Greenlight Books, Greenlight Bookstore in Brooklyn.
We love it.
Wonderful.
We love it. And we love Green Apple Books in here in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Dope. All right, Julie, thanks so much for taking the time to come talk with me.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, most definitely. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Later.